Single dad opens door for blind date. Freezes when simple woman whispers, "My kids are in the car." Ben thought it was just going to be another simple date, something easy to get back into after years of being a single dad. But when he opened the door, expecting to meet a woman ready for a night out, he was met with a soft, almost broken whisper. "My kids are in the car. They haven't eaten." His heart dropped. That voice, that quiet plea, it was too familiar. It wasn't just a date anymore. It was a reminder of everything he had fought through as a father. What happens next will challenge everything you know about kindness, sacrifice, and what it means to truly help someone in need. Stay with me, because the twist that's coming will change the way you see the world. Ben Carson had been a single dad for years. Life had been a balancing act: work, parenting, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. But tonight, there was a flicker of something different, something that he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The hope of reconnecting with a world that had slipped into the background after his wife left, taking more than just her things. She'd taken with her a piece of his heart, and for years, he had been too afraid to look for it again. But now, he stood at the edge of that very thing he had avoided for so long: dating. He wasn't looking for anything serious, not yet. But tonight, he had a date. A woman he'd met online, someone who seemed kind and down to earth. It wasn't love at first sight, but that wasn't what Ben was after. He was looking for a connection, something real, a conversation without the weight of his responsibilities as a father. But he knew the reality. He was a single dad. That came first. Always. Ben stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt and tie with meticulous care. The reflection staring back at him was the man who had worked tirelessly for years to make sure Tyler, his son, had everything he needed. Tyler was 8 years old now, full of energy, with a constant stream of questions and a love for superhero movies. Ben smiled at the thought. Tyler had been his everything since the day his wife left. They had built a life together, a life of shared moments, struggles, and victories. Ben had learned to be both mom and dad, but even after all this time, he was still finding his way. "Dad, is she here yet?" Tyler's voice echoed from the living room, full of excitement and curiosity. Ben chuckled softly, hearing the unease in his son's tone. "You know, buddy, I don't think she's going to be here for a while," Ben said, wiping the last speck of dust from the kitchen table. "But when she does, you'll be the first to know." Tyler's eyes lit up. "I want to meet her, Dad. Will she like tacos?" "I like tacos." Ben laughed. It had become their inside joke over the years. No meal was complete without tacos, even if it was just the two of them sitting at the table, laughing and enjoying each other's company. Tacos were their comfort food, their tradition. "I'm sure she'll love tacos," Ben said, adjusting his sleeves. "But you know what? You can be the judge of that, buddy." A few minutes passed before the doorbell rang. Ben's heart skipped a beat. There it was, the moment he had been anticipating and dreading. He wasn't ready for this, not really. Not for the vulnerability that came with meeting someone new. But he wasn't going to back out now. He couldn't. Tyler needed to see that life wasn't about hiding from what scared you. It was about embracing the unknown, even when it felt uncomfortable. He walked to the door, his hand on the knob. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, reminding himself that it was just dinner. Nothing more, nothing less. As he opened the door, he was met with a woman standing in the dim light of the porch. She looked beautiful, but there was something in her eyes that gave him pause. Something that was hard to place, something that felt familiar yet foreign. Her chestnut hair hung loosely around her shoulders, and her green eyes seemed to hold a quiet story, a story of struggles, perhaps, or of things left unsaid. She wasn't exactly what he expected, but then again, who could say what anyone really expected from a blind date? "Hi," she said, her voice soft, almost shy. "I'm Claire." Ben blinked, taking in the sight of her. She looked nervous, he could tell. She wasn't the type to be glammed up for a date. In fact, there was an authenticity to her that made Ben feel both at ease and uneasy at the same time. This wasn't a date full of polished words and rehearsed conversations. This was real, and he wasn't prepared for real. "Hi, Claire. I'm Ben," he said, stepping aside to let her in. But before she entered, she hesitated for just a moment. "My kids are in the car," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They haven't eaten." Ben's heart froze. The words hit him in the chest like a cold splash of water, knocking the breath from his lungs. He stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. My kids are in the car. They haven't eaten. It wasn't the words themselves that struck him so deeply. It was the way she said them. There was a quiet shame in her voice, an unspoken pain that he recognized instantly. He had been there. He had been that parent who didn't have enough for dinner, the one who hid the tiredness behind a forced smile. He knew what it was like to stretch a meal so thin, to tell your child that you would eat later, or that there just wasn't enough to go around. Ben's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? This wasn't part of the plan. He wasn't prepared for this kind of responsibility tonight. He was just trying to have a simple dinner, but Claire's words weren't just an invitation into her life. They were a window into her world. A world of struggle, of hardship, and of the things she was too ashamed to say aloud. Ben could feel it, deep in his gut. This wasn't just about meeting someone new. It wasn't just about a date. It was about something much bigger, something more important. Without thinking, Ben stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Bring them in, he said, his voice steady despite the shock running through him. Tacos don't judge. Claire's eyes softened, a flicker of relief washing over her face. She nodded and stepped inside, and Ben noticed that the weight she carried seemed to lessen just a little bit. But the reality of the situation hit him as soon as he stepped back into the living room. Tyler was sitting on the couch, his flashlight held in one hand like a little baton. He was dressed in mismatched socks and his favorite superhero t-shirt, unaware that tonight would change everything for him as well. Ben looked at his son, who had been waiting eagerly to meet his father's date. Tyler, this is Claire, he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying edge of concern. And these are her kids. Claire, this is my son, Tyler. Tyler stood up, his eyes wide with curiosity. Nice to meet you, he said, extending his hand, though it was clear that he was more interested in the unfamiliar faces than the formalities of a handshake. Claire smiled gently, kneeling down to Tyler's level. Nice to meet you, too, she replied, her voice warmer now that the tension in the room had started to ease. A few minutes passed, and Claire's kids, two young children, both under 10, slowly entered the living room, shy and tired. Her daughter clung to a worn-out stuffed rabbit, a sign that she had seen better days. The exhaustion in their eyes was evident, but they didn't say much. They didn't have to. Ben quickly grabbed plates from the kitchen, setting them down on the table. It wasn't much, just a simple meal of tacos, the same tacos Tyler had requested earlier. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that, for this one night, the children wouldn't have to worry about not having enough. They wouldn't have to feel the weight of hunger that Ben knew all too well. As Claire sat at the edge of the table, her body tense, Ben made a decision. He wasn't going to let this moment go by without offering what he could. It wasn't about impressing her or pretending to be something he wasn't. It was about showing her, in the simplest way possible, that she wasn't alone. I was a single parent at 26, Ben said, his voice softer now. I know that walk. The one where you try not to look too hungry or too tired because people assume things. Claire's head jerked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time. She studied him, as though seeing him for the first time as well. There was no judgment in his voice, no pity, just an understanding that ran deep. And for the first time that evening, Claire allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. But little did Ben know, what had started as a simple dinner was about to turn into something much more. A journey that would change both their lives in ways they never expected. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the television where Tyler and Claire's children had settled, watching cartoons. They were quiet kids, shy at first, but there was something about Ben's simple offer of tacos that seemed to make them feel safer. As they ate, their tiredness began to fade, and little by little, they started to relax, as if the weight of the world had been lifted for just one evening. Ben glanced at Claire, sitting at the edge of the table. Her posture was stiff, her eyes avoiding his as she quietly pushed the taco around on her plate. She hadn't touched her food much, her hands trembling slightly every time she picked up a bite. Ben could tell she wasn't just nervous about the date. No, there was something deeper, something she wasn't willing to share. He could sense it in the way she shifted in her seat, in the way she looked at the kids when they giggled, like she was carrying a burden too heavy to set down. Ben, ever the observer, decided not to press her. He'd been through his own struggles. After all, he wasn't just a single dad by chance. He understood what it meant to carry things silently, to to hold the world together with an invisible thread. He didn't need to ask her why she was so hesitant. He already knew the answer. Life wasn't always kind, and sometimes people built walls for good reason. "Tyler," Ben said, breaking the silence. "How about you show Claire's kids how to build the tallest Lego tower? Think you can do that?" Tyler's eyes brightened at the idea of a challenge. He loved Lego, and he was more than willing to share his passion for building with new friends. As he jumped up to grab his Lego box, Claire's son looked at her, as if asking permission. Claire nodded softly, giving him a quiet smile. Ben could see the flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and it made him feel both comforted and uneasy. This evening, though simple, had already become something much more significant than he had imagined. But before he could process what was happening, Claire's hand gently grasped the edge of her sleeve, her fingers pulling at the fabric nervously. Ben's gaze drifted to the window. The night outside had deepened, and the streetlights outside flickered in the distance. It was peaceful, almost tranquil, but something in Claire's body language was telling him that peace was fleeting for her. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, and just as Ben was about to ask if she was okay, she spoke. "I was going to cancel," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the laughter of the kids in the background. "I almost turned around, but something told me not to." Ben paused, the weight of her words sinking in. There was more to her than just the tired mother he saw before him. There was a woman who had been through things Ben couldn't even imagine. He leaned forward, his voice low, but full of sincerity. "I'm glad you didn't," he said. "I think tonight was meant to be." Claire met his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. But before she could respond, she turned her head toward the window, her expression shifting from one of relief to one of concern. Her hand slipped to her lap, and she folded it tightly, as if trying to anchor herself to something solid. Ben followed her gaze, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. It was just the quiet street outside, the streetlights casting soft halos over the pavement. But Claire seemed uneasy, her eyes darting back and forth between the window and the door. Ben's instincts kicked in. He had been around enough to know when something was wrong, when the air shifted and you knew that trouble was lurking just out of sight. "Claire," Ben asked gently, not wanting to startle her. "Is something wrong?" Her eyes locked with his, and in that moment, Ben could see it. The fear, the vulnerability. She was no longer just a woman on a blind date. She was a mother, desperate to protect her children from something she couldn't control. Ben's heart twisted. He knew that feeling all too well. I don't know if I should tell you this," she said, her voice shaky. "But I feel like I need to. I'm not sure if I should have brought my kids here. But he's been following me." Ben's stomach dropped. He felt the shift in the room, the tension building in the space between them. There it was, the unspoken truth. The fear Claire had been carrying silently. She wasn't just a mother looking for a safe place for her kids. She was running from something, from someone. Ben leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "Who's following you?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "My ex. He's controlling. He doesn't want custody. He wants control. He checks the GPS on my car, and if I go anywhere he doesn't approve of, he calls. He threatens me. He's even got a new girlfriend, his third one this year, but he's still obsessed with making sure I'm scared." The words hit Ben like a physical blow. He had heard stories of controlling relationships, of abusive partners who never truly let go, but hearing Claire say it, with that quiet desperation in her voice, made it real. This wasn't just about a man trying to manipulate her. It was about a man who had power over her every move, a man who used fear as a leash. Ben felt a protective instinct surge within him. It was the same feeling he had when he looked at his son. When he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would do anything to protect the ones he loved. "I'm sorry," Ben said, his voice firm now, despite the shock. "But you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you or your kids while you're under this roof." But Claire's eyes were full of doubt. "You don't understand. He knows things about me. Things I don't want anyone to know. He knows where I live. He's threatened me before." Ben's mind raced, but his words came out steady. "That's why you're here now. He doesn't get to control where you feel safe. You're with me, and we'll figure this out together." Claire looked at him, her expression shifting, as though the weight of her fears had been lifted just slightly. But Ben could still see the doubt lingering in her eyes. He could feel the heaviness of her past pressing down on her. Just then, Tyler's laughter broke the tension. He and Claire's son were racing toy trucks down the hallway, lost in their own world of play. Ben smiled softly, watching them. He knew that feeling, the simple joy of childhood, unburdened by the weight of the world. But outside, Ben knew, the storm was still brewing. Claire wasn't the only one who was running from something. He had his own scars, his own fears. And as much as he wanted to believe that tonight could be a fresh start, a quiet evening of connection, he couldn't ignore the reality of what was happening. Claire's ex wasn't just going to disappear. Ben could feel it in his bones. The night wasn't over. Not yet. The warmth of the room had settled over them like a comforting blanket, but beneath that surface, Ben could sense a growing tension. Claire, though she had accepted the food and the small talk, seemed to be lost in her own thoughts, her eyes flicking toward the door every so often as though expecting something, or someone. Ben caught the unease in her movements, the subtle way she gripped the edge of her chair, pulling at the fabric of her sleeve. It was as if she was waiting for something to happen, but didn't know when or where it would come from. Ben had been through his share of struggles. He knew what it felt like to be uncertain, to carry burdens you couldn't share with anyone. He had raised Tyler alone for so long that he had become accustomed to the quiet ache of isolation. But what Claire was carrying felt heavier. He could see it in her eyes now that they weren't obscured by the weight of her smile. There was a quiet storm within her, a storm that she wasn't yet ready to share. "I'm glad you're here," Ben said softly, trying to break the silence without prying too deeply. "You and the kids are welcome to stay as long as you need." Claire's eyes flickered to him, and for a split second, he could see something shift, a kind of guarded vulnerability, as though she was about to say something, but chose not to. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and then smiled faintly. "Thanks," she said, her voice quieter than it had been before. "I've never been very good at asking for help." Ben nodded, understanding more than she could know. "It's okay. You don't have to. I think we all get to a point where we just need a little bit of space, a moment to breathe." There was a long pause, the kind that felt like it was filled with unsaid things. The kids, oblivious to the tension in the air, continued to play in the living room. Tyler had already jumped into the Lego building challenge with Claire's son, their laughter and excited chatter filling the space with life and noise. It was almost impossible to think that just moments ago, Claire had walked into his home with the quiet weight of a secret she had yet to reveal. But as Ben watched the kids, his mind began to wander back to that quiet moment when Claire had first arrived. He remembered the words she had whispered, almost as though she was ashamed to speak them aloud. "My kids are in the car. They haven't eaten." The words had hit him harder than he expected. More than just an innocent statement, they had sounded like a cry for help, a subtle plea that had stuck with him. It was funny, Ben thought. In his years of raising Tyler, there had been moments of similar desperation, of doing everything he could to make sure Tyler felt secure and loved, even when things were falling apart behind closed doors. But there had always been someone to help, even if it was just a neighbor offering to pick up groceries or drop off a meal. For Claire, it seemed like the weight of the world was hers alone to carry, with no one offering a hand to help her through it. No one, until tonight. As Ben reached for his glass of water, he noticed Claire looking at her phone, her expression unreadable. She swiped at the screen quickly, her fingers moving with purpose, but her eyes kept darting nervously toward the window. Ben's instincts, honed over years of solo parenting and facing the quiet chaos of life, suddenly flared up. There was something more here, something unsaid. "Claire, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. She hesitated before putting the phone down, but the look in her eyes told Ben that whatever was weighing on her was more than just the typical concerns of a single mom. She swallowed hard before speaking, as if gathering the courage to let the words fall out. "I wasn't sure I should have come here tonight," Claire said, her voice cracking slightly. "But I didn't know where else to go." Ben felt a pang of concern deep in his chest. He didn't push her to elaborate. Sometimes, the most powerful words were the ones left unspoken, but that didn't stop Ben from feeling the rising tide of worry inside him. "I'm glad you came," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "You and the kids are safe here, Claire. I don't want you to feel like you have to leave just because it's getting late." Claire's face softened, but there was still that underlying tension in her eyes, that unspoken fear that she was trying to keep buried. Ben felt his pulse quicken as he realized there was something more at play here, something he hadn't been able to see yet. And then it happened. Just as Ben was about to ask her again if everything was truly okay, Claire glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with panic. She quickly stood up and walked toward the window, her body stiff and tense. Ben stood up too, his eyes narrowing as he followed her gaze. The street outside was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. But Claire seemed frozen, her hand clutching the curtains like a lifeline. Ben moved closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder gently. She flinched at the touch, her body rigid under his hand. "Claire," he asked, his voice low and concerned. "What's going on?" Her breath hitched in her chest, and she turned to him, her face pale. "He's here. He's following me again." Ben's stomach dropped. For a moment, time seemed to freeze as Claire's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. He had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about a simple ex-husband or some petty argument. There was something much darker at play here. Ben's protective instincts flared up, and without thinking, he moved toward the door, ready to face whatever threat was lurking outside. "Who?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. "Who's following you?" Her eyes filled with fear, and she took a step back, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the words hit her. "My ex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He doesn't want custody. He wants control. He's been tracking my every move. He watches my car, he checks where I go, and if I step out of line, he calls. He threatens me. He knows everything. I thought I could get away, but he's still here, still watching." Ben's heart raced. He could feel the tension mounting as the reality of Claire's situation settled in. This wasn't just a woman on a date, trying to make a fresh start. This was a woman running for her life, trying to escape a toxic, controlling relationship. And she was looking for a place to hide. Without thinking, Ben moved to the front door, peering out through the peephole. His hand hovered near the lock, and the sudden realization hit him like a punch in the gut. This was no longer just about a simple dinner. It was a rescue mission, and he had just been thrown into the middle of it. Claire's voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring this into your home. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I don't know where else to turn." Ben didn't hesitate. "You don't need to apologize. You're safe here. You and the kids are safe, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." As Ben stood by the door, his eyes scanning the dark street outside, his mind raced with the gravity of the situation. He had been expecting an evening of casual conversation, of perhaps a few laughs and light-hearted moments. But what had started as a quiet dinner had now become something much bigger, a responsibility, a duty to protect and help Claire and her children. Ben's heart clenched with the weight of what he had just learned. But there was no time to dwell on it. He knew he had to act quickly to figure out what to do next. Ben's fingers tightened around the door handle as he peered through the peephole. His heart hammered in his chest as he saw a black sedan parked 2 houses down. The engine was running. The tinted windows made it impossible to see who was inside, but Ben didn't need to guess. His gut told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just an ordinary car. This was the shadow of Claire's past creeping closer to her present and her future. "Ben," Claire whispered, her voice shaking. "He's watching. He's always watching." Ben didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing. He knew he couldn't just let it go, not when Claire's safety, and her children's safety, was on the line. The fear in her voice was enough to make his blood boil. No one had the right to make someone feel like this. No one had the right to control another person's life through threats and intimidation. Without thinking, he turned to Claire. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone else." Claire hesitated, looking torn, but she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had no one else to turn to, and Ben was all she had in this moment. "I'll be right back," he said, his voice steady, despite the churn of panic in his gut. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door and stepped outside. As Ben stepped into the night air, the cold hit him like a slap, but he didn't flinch. He walked slowly down the porch steps, his mind working fast, calculating the best way to handle the situation. He could feel the weight of Claire's trust on his shoulders, the weight of the responsibility he now carried. The car across the street remained motionless, its lights dimmed. Ben's pulse quickened as he crossed the yard, every muscle in his body tense. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he was sure of one thing. He wasn't going to let anything happen to Claire or her kids. He walked to the car, keeping his steps slow and steady. He didn't want to startle anyone, but he also didn't want to give whoever was inside the car a chance to drive off before he could confront them. As he reached the back of the car, he stopped. His breath came in short bursts, and for a moment, he hesitated. Should he just knock on the window? Demand to know what they were doing? He had no idea who he was dealing with, but something told him that playing this safe wasn't an option. Just then, the driver's side window rolled down, revealing a man with sharp features and a cold expression. His eyes locked onto Ben's with an unsettling intensity. "Can I help you?" Ben asked, trying to keep his voice calm, even though his anger was bubbling just below the surface. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he sized Ben up, his lips curling into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for someone," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "I believe you know where she is." Ben's stomach turned. He didn't need to ask who the man was talking about. Claire. This was Claire's ex, the one she had been running from. The one who had been tracking her every move, controlling her life from behind a screen. "Who are you?" Ben asked, his voice now laced with more authority. He took a step forward, his body blocking the view of Claire's house from the man's eyes. "I don't think I'm the one you're looking for." The man's eyes flicked to the porch, where the light from the window still shone brightly, but he didn't seem fazed by Ben's presence. Instead, he leaned back in his seat and let out a dark chuckle. "I know exactly where she is, and I don't think you're in a position to be asking questions." Ben's jaw tightened, and his fists clenched. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when Claire was depending on him. He knew he had to do something. He had to get rid of this guy, whatever it took. "I'll ask you one more time," Ben said, his voice cold. "Get in your car and leave. Now." The man's expression darkened. His smirk faded, replaced by a glint of anger that was unmistakable. "I don't take orders from anyone, least of all you. You don't know who you're dealing with." Ben took a step closer, his anger boiling over. "I know exactly who you are, and I know what you've been doing to her. You're not going to hurt her again. Not on my watch." The man's face flushed with fury. "You think you can protect her? You think you can just waltz in and take her side? You're nothing but a sad little man who thinks he's some kind of hero." Ben didn't respond. He didn't need to. His instincts were telling him to push forward, to make this man understand that he wasn't going anywhere until he left. The man started to open the door, as though preparing to get out of the car, but Ben was faster. Without a second thought, he stepped forward and slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the entire vehicle. "You don't want to make this worse," Ben warned, his voice steady but firm. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away." The man's eyes flared with rage. For a split second, Ben thought the situation might escalate further, but then the man seemed to reconsider. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a low growl. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You think you've won? You've only just begun to understand who you're messing with." Ben stood his ground. He didn't flinch. "This ends tonight. Leave now, or I'll make sure you don't come back." The man glared at him one last time. Then, without another word, he threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as he sped off into the night. Ben watched as the car disappeared down the road, his heart still racing in his chest. He stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to steady himself. He had done it. He had confronted Claire's ex, and for the moment, he had won. But something told him this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Ben stood in front of the door for a few moments after the car sped off, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His heart was still hammering in his chest, his pulse quick with the adrenaline of the confrontation. But he knew that wasn't the end of it. The man had been dangerous, and Ben had no illusions that this would be the last time Claire's ex tried to intimidate her. No, that wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He turned, his steps slow but steady, as he made his way back to the house. The street was eerily quiet now, almost as though the night had swallowed the tension. His mind raced with 100 questions. Was Claire safe now? Would her ex come back? How far would this man go to get what he wanted? The door opened just as Ben reached it, and Claire stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with concern. The moment she saw Ben, the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease, and her breath seemed to return to her body. "Ben, is he gone?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ben nodded, stepping inside. "He's gone. For now, at least." Claire didn't seem entirely convinced, but she nodded anyway, as if trying to believe his words. She stepped aside to let him in, her movements stiff but with a kind of relief that was impossible to miss. Ben could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him. He had promised to protect her, and though he'd faced down her ex, he knew there was more to this story, things Claire hadn't told him yet. And he needed to know. He needed to understand what was driving her fear so that he could help her, really help her. Ben walked to the living room, where Tyler and Claire's children were still playing, completely unaware of the danger that had just been lurking outside their door. Tyler, as usual, had found himself in the middle of the chaos of Legos, his hands moving quickly as he tried to beat Claire's son at building the tallest tower. The kids were happy, in their own world of laughter and innocence. But for Ben, the weight of what had just happened was crushing. He turned to Claire, who was standing by the doorway, watching the kids with a faraway look in her eyes. "I'm glad they're okay," Ben said softly. "But I need to know more, Claire. What's really going on? Who is this man, and why won't he leave you alone?" Claire's face darkened. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking down at the floor. She didn't speak at first, and for a long time, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the television. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked up at him. "You're right," she said, her voice tight. "You deserve to know. It's just hard to talk about." Ben nodded, not wanting to push her, but knowing this was the moment she had to open up. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for. But I'm here, Claire. Whatever you need to say, whatever you need to do, we'll figure it out." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to bring you into this," she continued, her voice low. "But I don't know what else to do anymore. I'm scared." Ben sat down on the couch, patting the spot next to him. "Tell me what's been going on." "I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, Claire stood there, her hands twisting the hem of her sleeve. Then, she sat beside him, her shoulders trembling as she finally let the truth come out. "My ex," she started, her voice shaking, "his name's Chase. He and I got together when we were young. I was naive, and I thought I could change him. But he was always controlling. First, it was little things. He'd tell me where I could go, who I could see. He didn't like me having friends, didn't like me working. But it wasn't until I had the kids that it really got bad. That's when he started using them against me. He'd threaten to take them away, tell me that I wasn't fit to raise them." Ben listened carefully, his heart breaking for Claire as the story spilled out. He knew that fear, that feeling of being trapped in a relationship that didn't let you breathe. But he had no idea it had gone this far for her. "He never physically hurt me," Claire continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But the things he said, the way he made me feel like I was never good enough, it wore me down. And then one day, I found out he'd been using my identity to open accounts in my name. Bank accounts, loans, credit cards. He was drowning us in debt, using me as a pawn in his game. He was controlling me through fear, through money, through everything I cared about." Ben's anger flared, but he didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't the time. Claire needed to get this out, and he was going to let her. "I tried to leave him once," she said, her voice trembling. "But he found me. He knew where I was. And when he came back, he promised he'd take the kids away if I ever left again. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed. I thought that was the only way to keep them safe. But it wasn't. It's never been safe. It's like he's always there, always watching. I can't escape him. I can't break free." Ben felt the weight of her words sink into him like a stone in his gut. He had never been through anything like this. He had never known what it was like to feel trapped by someone's control, to live in constant fear of losing everything. But as he looked at Claire, at this woman who had done everything she could to protect her kids, he knew that something had to change. He couldn't let her keep carrying this alone. "Not anymore. You don't have to be afraid anymore," Ben said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "I'm going to help you. I'm going to make sure you and the kids are safe. You don't have to do this alone." Claire looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But you don't even know me," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of. He's dangerous." Ben took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter. You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out. Together." For a long moment, Claire just stared at him. Then, something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in me." Ben didn't speak. He didn't need to. There was nothing more to say. His promise had been made. And now, he had to see it through, no matter what came next. The night was quiet again, but the peace felt fragile, like something could shatter at any moment. After the confrontation with Claire's ex earlier, Ben found himself awake far past midnight, unable to shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. He couldn't stop thinking about what Claire had told him, the control, the manipulation, the threats that had followed her wherever she went. Ben knew she was strong, but it was clear that the weight of her past had shaped her into someone constantly looking over her shoulder. It was one thing to hear about it. It was another thing entirely to witness it. He glanced over at the couch where Claire had fallen asleep, her head resting against a pillow as she tried to relax for the first time in what seemed like forever. Her children were asleep too. Tyler and Claire's son curled up on the floor, still tangled in their Lego creations, while her daughter was tucked into the armchair, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Ben found himself looking at them all, the family he never thought he'd have, and something stirred deep inside him. He had made a promise to protect them, and there was no way he was going back on it. But as much as he wanted to ignore the problem and pretend like everything would be okay, he knew that's not how the world worked. Chase wasn't going to give up. Claire's ex wasn't the kind of man to let go easily. Ben's mind raced as he processed everything. The threats, the surveillance, the fear that hung in the air every time Claire looked over her shoulder. He could feel it, the reality of what Claire had been hiding. He wasn't just protecting her. He was stepping into the battle she had been fighting for far too long. As the clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, Ben couldn't sleep. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than what they had already faced. He stood up, moving to the window, and pulled back the curtain just enough to scan the street. The stillness outside mirrored the calm inside, but Ben knew it was only temporary. The streetlights cast long shadows, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Yet, Ben had learned to trust his gut, and right now, it was telling him that he wasn't done with the danger yet. The black sedan from earlier, the one that had parked a few houses down, was gone. But it didn't matter. Ben wasn't foolish enough to think Chase had given up. Minutes passed. Ben paced the room, thoughts swirling in his head. The house was quiet, but Ben was anything but calm. He had to do something. He had to act, before things escalated further. Claire had been trapped in this toxic cycle for far too long. She had been afraid for her life and the lives of her children. She had been living in constant fear, unable to escape. But Ben wasn't about to let that continue. It was then that he heard the sound, an engine. Low, distant, but unmistakable. He stood still for a moment, listening intently. His heart rate picked up as the sound grew louder. It was coming down the street. He moved swiftly, silently, toward the window again. Ben's eyes narrowed as he saw the familiar black sedan round the corner and slow to a stop right in front of the house. His pulse quickened. This wasn't good. He turned back toward Claire, who was still asleep, unaware of the approaching danger. Ben's mind raced. He needed to make sure she was safe. He quickly moved toward the door, grabbing his phone and dialing a number he had hoped he wouldn't need to call. The urgency in his voice was clear. "Caleb, it's Ben. We need help. Now." He didn't wait for Caleb's response, just filled him in on what was happening. He couldn't take any chances. Caleb had helped Ben out of sticky situations before. His cyber expertise and connections had saved them both in the past. But this was different. This time, they were dealing with a man who had already shown his willingness to escalate things. He wasn't going to let Claire and her kids go without a fight. Ben clicked the phone off, heart pounding. As he moved back to the front door, he could hear the engine of the sedan rumble quietly outside. He didn't hesitate. He didn't have time to think. He unlocked the door and stepped outside, closing it gently behind him to avoid waking the kids. He approached the sedan cautiously, staying low and trying to blend into the shadows as best as he could. His hand hovered near his waistband, just in case things went south quickly. His mind raced as he considered the possibilities: confrontation, intimidation, or worse. But he wasn't about to let Chase intimidate him, not when it came to Claire. He had a job to do, and he wasn't leaving until it was done. Ben's heart was pounding as he reached the car. He stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, gathering his thoughts. The car window rolled down, and Ben's stomach churned as he faced the man he had only seen once before, Chase. The smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You really want to make this harder than it needs to be, don't you?" Chase's voice was smooth, but there was no mistaking the venom underneath. You don't get it, do you? She's mine, and I'm taking what's mine. Ben stood firm, his hands at his sides, fists clenched. You don't get to control her anymore, Chase. You've made her life a living hell, and I'm not going to let you do that anymore. It's over. Chase's eyes narrowed, and he stepped out of the car, his posture aggressive. You think you can stop me? He sneered. You don't even know who you're dealing with. Ben's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Someone who thinks they can scare people into submission. Someone who's so desperate for control that they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. The air between them grew thick with tension, and Ben could feel the intensity of the moment weighing on him. He had to stay calm. He couldn't let Chase see fear. Ben needed to make sure Claire and the kids were safe, and he wasn't going to back down now. You're a joke, Chase spat, taking a step toward Ben, his anger bubbling over. You're nothing. Just some guy who thinks he can play hero. Ben stood his ground. I'm not playing anything. This ends now. Chase took another step forward, but Ben didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Chase's. You don't scare me, Ben said firmly. I don't care who you are. You're not getting anywhere near her. The standoff between them felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was only moments. Finally, Chase stepped back, his face flushed with frustration. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath, before getting back into the car. Ben didn't move until the car had driven off, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. He remained where he was for a few moments, his breathing slow and steady, before turning and heading back inside. As he entered the house, he saw Claire sitting on the couch, eyes wide, her hand trembling as she gripped her phone. She had heard the confrontation. She had been listening. Ben sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his heart still pounding in his chest. It's over, he said quietly. For tonight, at least. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also a flicker of fear that hadn't quite left her. What happens next? Ben took a deep breath. We fight. We make sure you're safe. And we don't back down. She nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. I'm with you, she whispered. Ben nodded, a quiet promise hanging between them. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Claire had someone in her corner who was ready to fight. And he wasn't going anywhere. The night had passed without incident, but the calm was an illusion. Ben woke early, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on his mind. Claire's ex was still out there, somewhere, and it was only a matter of time before he tried again. The confrontation in the driveway the night before hadn't been enough to stop him. It was just a temporary setback. Chase didn't give up easily, and Ben knew it. He stood by the window, staring out into the early morning light, trying to get his bearings. There were too many unknowns. He couldn't protect Claire and her children from everything, especially not from someone like Chase. But he couldn't let that stop him. Not now. Ben turned to look at Claire, who was still asleep on the couch, her head resting against the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so vulnerable, and Ben couldn't help but feel a fierce need to keep her safe. The weight of the promise he had made to her was growing, and it wasn't something he could walk away from. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Ben's heart rate picked up. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he made his way to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was Caleb, the cybercrime analyst Ben had called last night. Caleb had helped him in the past with digital issues, but now it was something bigger. They needed answers, and Caleb was the key. Ben opened the door. Morning, Caleb said, giving Ben a quick nod as he stepped inside. You look like you haven't slept. Ben offered a tight smile. You could say that. How's it looking on your end? Caleb pulled out a tablet and sat down on the couch. He didn't waste time. I traced the car. The black sedan. It's registered under a shell company, one that's been funded by none other than Chase's family trust. Ben's stomach tightened. A shell company? So he's been hiding his tracks. Caleb nodded. Exactly. But that's not the worst of it. I dug a little deeper. Chase has been using several accounts under that same trust to fund his tracking. He's been hiring people to follow Claire, to monitor her every move. He's also been using her identity to open more accounts in her name. Loans, credit cards, more debt, more control. Ben ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the information sinking in. So he's been slowly strangling her. Not just emotionally, but financially. Caleb's eyes met Ben's, and he could see the concern in them. Exactly. And he's not going to stop until he has full control. We need to act fast if we want to get ahead of him. Ben swallowed hard. The stakes had just gotten higher. Claire wasn't just running from a toxic relationship. She was running from a well-funded operation designed to break her down in every possible way. Chase wasn't just playing games. He was playing for keeps. What do we do? Ben asked, his voice low but filled with determination. Caleb leaned forward, his fingers tapping quickly on the screen of his tablet. First, we need to secure Claire's financial records. I've got a contact who can help us freeze her accounts temporarily while we figure out what's been compromised. We can also get a trace on those loans and credit cards. If he's been using her identity, we can prove it. Ben nodded. Do it. Get everything locked down. And I need to make sure she's safe. I'm not letting him anywhere near her or the kids. Caleb looked at him, raising an eyebrow. You don't think he'll just let you keep her safe, do you? Ben clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. I'm not giving her up. I'm not giving up her kids. We're in this now. Caleb didn't argue. He simply nodded, understanding the depth of Ben's commitment. All right, I'll get to work on this right away. But Ben, we need to be smart. Chase has resources. He's not just a guy who shows up in a car and makes threats. He's been planning this. Ben's stomach churned at the realization of how deep the rabbit hole went. This wasn't just a matter of protecting Claire. It was a battle against a man who had been calculating every step for years. And Ben had to fight back. Before Caleb could leave, Claire stirred on the couch, waking up slowly, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Ben and Caleb, her face tensed for a moment, then softened when she saw the serious look on Ben's face. Ben, she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. What's going on? Ben turned to face her, trying to mask the worry in his eyes. We're making sure you're safe. We've got a plan. We're going to make sure Chase can't hurt you or the kids anymore. Claire's eyes filled with doubt, but also a flicker of hope that Ben hadn't seen in her before. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I'm so tired of running, Ben. I'm so tired of this. Ben walked over to her and knelt down beside the couch. You don't have to run anymore. You've got people now, people who will stand by you, no matter what. I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this ends. You deserve a life without fear. Claire swallowed hard, blinking back tears. She looked up at him, her expression one of both gratitude and disbelief. I never thought I'd find someone who would fight for me like this. I never thought anyone would care enough to help me get out of this mess. Ben took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. You're not alone, and we're going to figure this out. We'll go to the authorities if we have to, but we start by cutting him off at the knees. He's been controlling you with fear, with money, and we're not going to let him keep doing that. Claire nodded slowly, her hand trembling in his. I'm scared, Ben, but I'm ready. I'm ready to fight back. For me. For my kids. Ben smiled at her softly. That's the first step, and I'm right here with you. As Claire stood, her legs shaky but determined, Ben could feel the weight of everything they were about to face. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. They were up against a man who would stop at nothing to control her. But for the first time, Claire had someone in her corner who wasn't afraid to take on the fight. The days following their initial plan were filled with tension, each moment brimming with urgency. Ben and Claire knew that Chase wasn't going to back off just because they had confronted him once. He was dangerous, relentless. But they were ready. They had no choice. Claire was done running, and Ben wasn't about to let her fight this alone. With Caleb's help, they had locked down Claire's financial accounts and begun tracing the fraudulent loans. Ben had reached out to a lawyer, one who specialized in restraining orders and financial fraud. They had compiled enough evidence to present a compelling case, and with that, they started building their defense. But it wasn't enough to just hide behind legal protections. They needed to do more. Claire needed to reclaim her life, to take back the power that had been stolen from her piece by piece. And Ben wasn't about to let her do it quietly. He would stand beside her every step of the way. The night before the court hearing, Ben stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with a steady hand. His thoughts were calm, but his heart beat with purpose. This was it, the moment when Claire would take back control, when they would make their stand. Claire had already prepared herself. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into Ben's house days ago, afraid and uncertain. She had transformed into someone stronger, someone who no longer allowed fear to dictate her decisions. But still, she had doubts. She had her fears. This wasn't just a fight for her freedom. It was a fight for her children's future, too. Ben caught a glimpse of her as she entered the room, her eyes tired but resolute. "You ready?" he asked softly, turning to face her. She smiled faintly, though there was an underlying nervousness in her expression. "As ready as I'll ever be." Ben reached out, taking her hand in his. "No matter what happens in there, we've already won. You've already taken back something that no one can ever take from you. Your courage." Claire squeezed his hand, the familiar weight of his words grounding her. "Thank you, Ben. I don't know where I'd be without you." Ben's heart swelled at her words. He had promised to protect her, but he hadn't expected how deeply this journey would affect him. He hadn't realized how much his own past, his struggles as a single father, would make him feel connected to her fight. In a way, this was personal. This was more than just saving her. This was about showing her that she didn't have to fight alone. The court hearing was scheduled for the next morning. As they walked into the courthouse, Ben felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a heavy cloak. The hallways were filled with families, lawyers, and court officials, each one absorbed in their own world of legal battles and court proceedings. But for Ben and Claire, this wasn't just another day in court. This was the final stand. The moment they would take back everything that had been taken from them. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Claire sat beside Ben, her hands shaking slightly as she clasped them together. Across the room, Chase sat with his attorney, a smug expression on his face as he glanced at them. Ben could feel the heat of his stare, and for a moment, he was reminded of their confrontation outside. But there was a difference now. This time, Ben wasn't afraid. The hearing began, and Ben listened intently as the judge asked questions, reviewing the evidence presented by both sides. It wasn't long before Claire's attorney called her to the stand. Ben's heart pounded as Claire stood, her legs slightly unsteady but determined. As she made her way to the stand, she looked at Ben for reassurance, and he gave her a silent nod, his support unwavering. "Ms. Thompson," the attorney began, "can you tell the court about the nature of your relationship with the defendant, Mr. Spencer?" Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I met Chase when I was young," she began. "We were in love, or at least, I thought we were. But from the beginning, he controlled everything. Where I went, who I saw, how I spent my time. It didn't start out that way, but after we had our children, the control got worse. He didn't just want to be a part of my life. He wanted to own it." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she continued, each word a step closer to reclaiming her life. "When I tried to leave him, he threatened to take the kids. He used them to control me. And he's been using my name to rack up debt, to destroy me financially. He's been stalking me, tracking my every move, and I don't know how much longer I can live like this." Ben's fists clenched at his sides. He had heard bits and pieces of this before, but hearing it in her voice, in front of a judge, made it all too real. He felt a wave of anger surge through him. How could anyone do this to another human being? How could anyone treat another person this way, let alone someone as strong and kind as Claire? As the questioning continued, Claire's lawyer presented the evidence: the fraudulent loans, the tracking devices, the phone records, and the testimony from Caleb, who had traced Chase's financial transactions. The case was airtight. Finally, it was Chase's turn. His lawyer tried to argue that Claire was being unreasonable, that she was exaggerating the situation, that she had made false claims to try and gain full custody of the children. But the evidence spoke for itself, and it wasn't long before the judge interrupted. "Mr. Spencer, the court has seen enough," the judge said sternly. "Your actions are not just inappropriate, they are criminal. I am issuing a permanent restraining order against you. You will no longer have access to Ms. Thompson or her children. Any attempt to contact her will result in criminal charges." Ben watched as Chase's face twisted with anger, but it was no use. The judge had made his decision. The fight was over. As the courtroom emptied and the reality of their victory sank in, Ben and Claire stood side by side, feeling a weight lift from their shoulders. Claire had fought for her freedom, and now she had it. She had taken control of her life once again. But as Ben looked at her, he knew this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. Chase wasn't going to give up easily. But Claire had something she hadn't had before: a support system, a team, and most importantly, her own strength. Now, as you've witnessed Claire's incredible journey, I want you to think about this. What's your fight? Who in your life needs a helping hand, a promise of safety, or simply someone to stand by them when the world feels like it's against them? Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can make the biggest difference. Ben didn't have to get involved, but he chose to. And because of that, Claire's life changed forever. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for someone, or if you've been inspired by Claire's resilience, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's your story? And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We've got more inspiring stories coming your way. Stories of strength, resilience, and courage. Remember, you don't have to be a superhero to make a difference. You just have to be there when it counts. Take that step today.